Well, as I prepare the show for the evening, yes. Hello. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is, first of all, responding to the comment that I looked high. And this is more like what I'd look like when I'm high. Anyway, for those of you who are on watching this on YouTube after the fact, don't forget to like, subscribe, bell icon, all the whole mess over down here. And as usual, Anycubic Photon, easy mode for miniatures. Now, what I'm going to be doing tonight is it's going to be a slightly different show. I'm actually going to be pretty much going over how I do my works. Oh, excuse me. Alright, what do you want, Pussbutt? What are you wanting, baby girl? Guess I got my baby girl Shinju. Yeah. Shinju? Blue-eyed girl. Anyway. Put you back up on your bed. Good girl. Tonight, I'm actually going to be going through the workflow, not on how I sculpt the figures, but on how I come up with the concepts for, like, what it looks like. And as part of that, I'm going to go over how I concept. Well, let's go ahead and say how I concepted Grendel. So, like I said, tonight is not going to be an actual dedicated sculpt. This is more of an examination on how I come up with the ideas and that sort of thing. All right. So I'm just gonna sit around and shoot the breeze for just a few minutes while we're waiting on more people to show up in the chat over here. Chat's over here. Yeah.
Well, the chat's over here, down here if you're on the phone and stuff like that. Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Anyway, and while we're doing this, I will be kind of occasionally. All right. Oh. So, is anyone actually awake and watching right now? Excuse me. So, here we are, waiting for people to show up as I am preparing to go over how I concept something. Now, I will say this, I don't do concept art. I'm a bad boy. The reason I say that is, it's often, if this office, complete with Shinju here, was a professional game studio. What do you want? Yeah. Oh, and yes. Anyway, this is a professional game studio. If I was making, sculpting a figure for Valendar Games, on par with Games Workshop, my hands would never touch putty or ZBrush until the art director had already approved concept art for the troop type or character that I would be sculpting. Basically, the art director is the one who makes sure that everything has a consistent look and feel, so that you don't end up with orc mega knobs that look higher tech than the Terminator suits, or Eldar that have spiky bits like Dark Eldar and it kind of blur the lines. You don't want that. You want them to be distinct and have a look, and that comes from your art director. So the art director says, okay, we have a new army. Let's call it it's a new Xenos race. And it's the Fuzzbutts. And they're all feline. Yeah, like this one. And their armor and their weapons, they have more of a wood look to them than the primitive but wood looking, as opposed to primitive but junk pile look of orc. So I'd send off to the concept artists and say, here's what we have. Feline, human-sized. Armor and weapons appear to be made of wood, but are actually firing off bolts of psychic energy, let's say. Well, the concept artist would then start off by doing silhouettes, rough sketches of general shapes and silhouettes. Are they going to be broad and muscular like a Kazin, on par physically with the orcs? Are they going to be teeny tiny little people that maybe would be 5 feet tall, that are based on house cats? That sort of thing. Would the wood style, we know it's wood, but is it finely carved and engraved? Is it chunks of wood hacked out and slapped on? And once he's got some silhouettes, the art director will say, okay, I like 4, 14, 22, and 23. We're gonna go with those. And then the artist takes it back, and then he refines those concepts. And they do this back and forth. Occasionally it's like, no, take it back a bit on the chunky look. We want a little bit smoother. Or, we want a little bit larger shoulders of the muscle underneath the armor for when they show. They got big burly shoulders, but the hands be a lot longer because they got claws. Whatever. And then, after a few back and forths like this, the art director and the concept artist end up with concept art, which usually is very often just the front, side, 3/4, and occasionally a couple poses, a couple of variants of the head or hair or helmet, shoulder variants, whatever. And then they send to the sculptor saying, this miniature will be 24 millimeters to the eye if standing upright. This is your concept art. Make 4 with this armor and that weapon, 2 with that weapon, and 1 with that weapon, or what have you. And so that's 7 of the basic troops with the basic weapons. Then I would get started sculpting. But I would be sculpting what they send me, not my own vision. I would be sculpting what is on that concept art. And in the case of physical, green stuff, needle-type sculpt, the art director might say, okay, add a little bit over here and see if you can carve in some runes over here, what have you. With more digital sculpt, it could be a bit more extreme, saying, yeah, it doesn't look how I expected in 3D. See if you can pull that forward and stretch that way and make those bigger. And once I'm done, the art director says, okay, the pose is boring. Or, we need the gun to be bigger. Or what have you. And then finally, it goes off from, the art director signs off on it, and it goes off to the next stage where if it's green stuff, it gets molded, mold made of it, and then they start stamping out the metal or plastic, depending on what type of mold it is and what the intent is. And metal really isn't so much anymore. So it's almost entirely plastic or resin. If it's digital, I'm not sure how they handle the digital production. I believe they use an SLA printer and mold or they chop up the figure, and then they use an SLA printer to mold the individual pieces, and then there are people whose entire job is making sprues. And the sprue makers will sit there and make the sprues, arranging them in as tight and compact an arrangement as possible, so that one sprue this big could make 10 troops. Sans spaces, of course. So, that's basically the rundown on how it would work with a big company. But, gee, I'm not a big company. My only employees are emotional support animals, like Shinju here. And then Carlton, who's just kind of watching me from the corner. So, when I'm coming up with my concepts, I'm my own art director, concept artist, sculptor, all of it. So the first thing I got to do is I got to figure out, okay, so what am I going to do? And let's say I decide to do, I don't know, Grendel. Yes. Making sculpts of actual giants and trolls and things like that from legend. And Grendel is one of the more famous ones. So, okay, in the myth, or in the legend, really, it was a legend before it was written down as an epic poem. In the legend, Beowulf is physically powerful. He is able to hide and sneak like nothing his size should be able to the point where he's described as being wrapped in the night. And he has fiendish blood. Well, to be exact, he has the mark of Cain. He is descendant of Cain. Now, converting that to a typical fantasy world, there's no actual physical description of Grendel. No description of him being the size of a mountain or man-sized. We don't know if Grendel is a troll, a Jotun, a human berserker. All we know is that he didn't like the noise coming from Herod, the mead hall of the Danes. No, Hrothgar, the mead hall of the Danes, founded by Herod. So, we know he's not a dragon, because the way he's described does not fit, what little descriptions we have does not fit Nordic-style dragons. We know he's probably not a demon, because he is descended of Cain, who is an absolute mortal man. So even though he has the mark of Cain, he's not a demon. He could be a troll, he could be a Jotun, he could be a berserker. So what I decided was, okay, first of all, he does a lot of sneaking around. That doesn't sound like your typical berserker. So why not go half and half? And in a typical fantasy world, the mark of Cain would be replaced with fiendish blood. Now, I decided to go half and half. He's part troll, part giant. So, yes, Beowulf ripped his arm off. And his half-giant blood prevented him from immediately... And as far as Beowulf knew, he died. But what if he didn't? What if that arm just took a while to grow back? Because once he's badly hurt, it slows down his regeneration. So I designed the idea of him having this big, massive left arm, bulging fist that he could just reach out and grab people and completely snatch them up and run off with them. The other arm is still growing back, so it's long and thin, with the fingertips actually being talons instead of fingertips. So the end result was, okay, I need something that's a bit more human-like than your typical troll, but a bit more trollish than your typical giant, with one large hand, one scrawny hand, and bulging feet. And hold on just a second. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about all that. There was a mishap. I appear to have nobody watching because nobody's speaking in the chat. So, anyway, like I was saying, so I have this mental image. Hello, Man of Steel. Yeah, it's just when there's no one talking over here, it's like, nobody cares about the subject. So, anyway, that's when I start going through the procedures that I've shown on the show before, where I'll take the figure. I will pose him how I think he would be posed. In this case, he's hunched down really low with this shoulder dropped and this shoulder up. Like that. And I'll go through the sculpt. I'm sure most of you have seen the end result of my design for Grendel. If you have not, here it is. Grendel. Distorted, mutated, rough, trollish, and giantish. Yeah, that's Grendel. Now, on the stream, I sculpted him, I think, if I remember. I know I sculpted Beowulf, and it took me a day and a half, but as of this midday today, I finished painting Grendel. Let me zoom in the focus. Oh, that's a bit too much. Yeah. As we see, he's got little white heads all over him from living in the swamp and having oily skin. A really dark green cast to the back of the arms and the side of the thighs. And what you really couldn't see in those pictures is, except for these little bushes here and here, which are classic foliage type things just glued on, this is the base, the sculpted base, with water, a couple rocks, including one right behind his foot that's more like slate. But yeah, his eyes are, let me focus in. His eyes are reddish yellow. Not quite orange because it actually fades from red through yellow. The only thing that's didn't come from the photon was the little foliage bits here and here and here. Those are actual little green foliage bits that I glued onto the base. The water, the grassy area, the cracked earth, the cracked mud back behind in here. The water just has a gloss coat over paint. So yeah. Now, one thing I do when I'm trying to come up with an idea in the first place is I get reference pictures. And usually what I'll do is I'll just throw a vaguely related term into what's called Google image search. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some of the reference pictures that I downloaded while working on concepting the giants. And so I've got to open up a backdrop, so I'm going to just throw in Dash Studio. Yes, I vape, I know. Us older folks, it's better for us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the reference images for Giant that are going to be mostly inspiring a lot of the sculpts that I do. Not so much for exact proportions or even details or character concepts, but just for the feeling of the giants. What do they feel like? You know? So alright. So let's go ahead and pop to here. Okay. So this is one of the this is all organized alphabetically by file name. This one's file name is 2BD775F blah 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 blah. And hello, Dapper Gent. I'm going over references and things. Now, the primary thing this is a reference for is something I haven't even begun to sculpt. It's going to be one of the stretch goals. We're not going to deal with it, but I was just looking at some of the treatments. For example, how they treated, like this big net on across his chest, the usage of nautical bits for like his belt buckle and that. And then we've got this was mostly for Farragut. More for Farragut. I had considered doing a fire giant type, like a Surtur, but that's way on the back burner. Just the overall feel of a hunchback, the mass, is what this one is contributing. That one, long story. And, okay, can't read that file. Again, more for just the feel, not the size and the look. This is an orc, not a giant, but just the crude, angular, hate-filled armor and weapons are going to be applied to at least one of my upcoming critters. Yes, there are some goofy things in here, including this humanoid blue whale. Another Saracen that is intended for concept for Farragut. Another giant, just for the sake of unusual proportions, strange features, just to give an alien feel to it. And of course, everyone knows the hill giants. This is not a toga. This is a chitin. And again, more humor. You're seeing a lot referencing something that I haven't even begun to sculpt yet. That involves whales, giants, underwater, and Greek stuff. Here's another great one. He's got more of a demonic foot for him. You're welcome. He's got more of a demonic foot on him right here. But, yeah, again, he's got shields wrapped around his wrist. And some poor schmuck who is apparently mummified inside a oubliette cell hanging from his neck as an amulet. Yet another humanoid whale, don't ask. An Etten. I had considered doing an Etten, but really and truly, most of the multi-headed giants in Legend are nothing like the Etten from D&D. They're actually more magically powerful than the single-headed ones. You know, it's a two-headed giant that Jack the Giant Killer convinces to turn himself into a mouse and then kills the mouse. Because he's magical and has the power of shapeshifting. This is a sheep skull. This was actually used as reference when I was doing the sheep skull on the back of Polyphemus's forearm. Again, more humanoid whales, including a rather funny one. And we're back at the front. Or front at the back, whatever. So that's just the basics on just a rough overview. Much of the reference pictures that I used for Grendel and Polyphemus and a couple others are gone because I've already used them. I've shipped them to an old, not old, but to a concept art folder. Just how big is it? Let's see. The one currently on my desktop. Right click, properties. And it's counting files and measurement. Okay, the one on my desktop is only 250 meg. Only. Keep that in mind. The one in my storage drive. Properties. 4.6 gigabytes of images in 230 folders. A total of 8,663 files. Some of the folder names include, view by list, be easier. Jabberwock, Kooky Cannons, Rings and Scrolls, Archways, Bumper Cars, Crazy Swords, Historical Armor, Intricate Weapons, Landsknecht, Shoggoth, Shoot 'em Up Sprites, Vampire Hunters, Wizard Headgear, Wyvern Physical Therapy stuff, all sorts of mixed and matched concept art. And Man of Steel, I am actually a formerly active member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, so yeah. I was going to do a Landsknecht not for 3D printing, but for my day job, which is working for Dad's studio. But the way the rigging works, if you make something for Dad's studio, they want it to work 100% perfectly without cloth simulation. You know how the sleeves and pants are for a Landsknecht. Wanting that to work perfectly rigged with no cloth simulation. Oh, that was a nightmare. With a miniature, it's so much easier because you don't have to worry about, okay, if I suddenly have the figure bend his arm, I've got to make sure that the puffs right here flatten out and don't pierce right through his arm. And oh yeah, oh no, I've seen a full kimono with the full draping square sleeves and the whole 9 yards done well. It's just that there's done well, and there's cloth sim that makes it look damn near perfect. Huge difference. Yeah. Yeah, all those puffed and slashed sleeves and pantaloons on the Landsknecht and their hats, their daggum hats. No, ooh, it would be literally far more effort than it was worth. For sculpting, for printing, that's a totally different matter because I don't need to worry about it. I just need to know, okay, how does it look in this pose and this pose alone? On the other hand, I can take aspects of the Landsknecht. For example, I can apply the puffed and slashed sleeves to the arms of a city guardsman. I can apply the breastplate of a conquistador to a dwarven miner, and then add some details to it to make it look more like it's made out of leather instead of steel or iron. When sculpting for a miniature, it's so much easier. The entire drapery is done by hand. There are occasions where I will do cloth sim drapery, but then it has to be refined and tweaked before it can be sculpted. A perfect example of this would be Polyphemus's toga. Well, he doesn't really have a toga either. It's a tunic that has one sleeve, and it's kind of torn and all messed up. It's actually closer to just rags, but I used a cloth simulator called and put it, fitted it to him, and then let it hang, let it wrinkle, change some details and positionings until it had some nice wrinkles and some nice drapery to it. And I'm going to pull up the plastic one because the other one is too fragile. And the end result is he's got a lot of the drapery going on with his clothing. And that was done a lot. And then I had to take it in and solidify it so that it wasn't just a single open loop of polygons. Now, for the most part, when I sculpt, I am coming up with concepts as I sculpt. If I look at a sculpt and I think, okay, it's looking kind of plain, what do I need to add to it? And that's how Polyphemus got his sheep skull bracer. Because, think about it. Odysseus, Nemo, got away by hiding on the underbelly of a sheep. That sounds odd, Dapper Gent. Anyway, so I figure, after he tossed the rocks at Odysseus' ship and failed to sink it, and he was all upset, he realized how they had gotten out because he found rope around one of the sheep. He gets mad, kills the sheep, and puts its skull on his forearm, both as a bracer and to remind himself never to be fooled like that again. Well, now that he's blind, that's the sheep skull bracer. With Grendel, I figured, okay, he lives in a swamp. It's greasy, grimy, nasty. So he's got pimples everywhere. Big ones. Big old whiteheads that if he was as big as that miniature is in proportion to him, those whiteheads would be like that big around. Go. So I painted up, and I painted them by, once I had his skin done, I painted some red wash from Army Painter, red tone, around on the pimple in the area around it. I then used Vallejo's glaze medium. Just to show you a little bit better, because this is a bit Vallejo model colors glaze medium, and you mix that at what's appropriate for you and for the paint you're using, In this case, I mixed it with mummy robes from Army Painter, which is a kind of an off-white bone color. And now it's a perfect glaze. Just put a very thin coat and build up until you get to build up on the. Let's use my knuckle as a. Actually, this one's more. Build my knuckle. A very thin coat, painting towards the tip, and then do another just a little bit on top, and you got this fading from green or tan through red, where it's, the skin's gotten angry, and then up into the white for the white head. I also took that same red tone wash and used it, and I painted it. He had some slashes to represent scars, and I painted it in there just to give it some scar, because he might have green and tan skin, but Grendel's got red blood. So I come up with these. Okay, this is looking plain. What do I do? I don't think I'm going to have that problem with Farragut, simply because of the amount of detail that a Saracen hill giant with a few levels of fighter that give him the battle master path. He's a hill giant who's highly skilled with a great sword and can do things like the trip attack and all these other techniques and skills. So yeah, he's pretty dangerous, and he's a tactician. He's a super genius from the point of view of hill giants. How much of a genius is he? What did I give him for his intelligence? Let's see. There's the PDF files. Farragut. Apparently, I gave him an intelligence of 9, which does make him a genius by hill giant standards. As a battle master, excuse me, hiccups. He's got 4 superiority dice, and the maneuvers disarming strike, riposte, trip attack, which, because of his size, works on huge or smaller foes. Alright, we're only 40 minutes in. Do y'all have any questions about technique or anything? They are, but hill giants in D&D are not that bright. They're, me smash. Me smarter than ogre, but not as smart as orc. That's a hill giant in D&D. They got intelligence of like 7. Actually, let me look, because I believe I have... Hold on a second. Come on out of there. Yeah, there we go. I have the PDF copy of the launcher manual on my tablet. But yeah, frost giants and fire giants are the D&D giants based mostly on the Norse mythos, and they're human or more intelligence. One thing to remember is that in Nordic myth, giants were not mortal. They were totally immortal. They were not totally immortal. They were like the gods. They were supernatural beings that represented forces and fundamental concepts. Okay, there's the monster manual. Now the problem is, this is an insignia. They're kind of weak and slow. It's still loading. Okay. Let me go ahead and pull this over to about there. Let's see if the page loads. Come on. Okay, no, that's dragons. And this page, come on and load. This is a slow. Okay, Galabdur. Gargoyle. Come on. Slow tablet. Genies. It's taking time. Yeah, it was cheap. I'll give it that. And when you pay $60 for a 10-inch tablet, you don't really complain much. Especially since you can put in any size micro SD card. Yay! Okay, come on, load, darn you, load, darn you. Okay, Hill Giant. It's Cloud, Fire, Frost, Hill. Hill Giant's intelligence is 5, and look at the picture of him. Obviously, this is the Hill Giant. Yeah. Strength of 21, Dex of 8, Con of 19, Intelligence of 5, Wisdom of 9, Charisma of 6. And pretty much their only things are they're straight up brute force. They've got a great club and a rock. And they only speak giant. If you consider them going ugly smash to be speech. Okay, sculpting eyes. Well, that's a rough one. That entirely depends. Do you mean the shape of eyes, or just making them in the first place? Or do you mean how to make sure they stick out on a figure? Because most of what I do is when I made my base geometry, the eyes were... I made the shape of the eye socket and pulled it back a bit and then put in a curved section behind it. So technically the eyes are actually a separate piece on the base geometry. And then when I use Dynamesh, it becomes one single solid piece. And I'll often go back in ZBrush and use the slash tool, very lightly going in to re-emphasize the outline of the eyes, just like I'll also do the line of the mouth. Oh. And it is 9:15. You can cheat. The curved surface I was referring to was the front third of the sphere, by the way. But yeah, you can cheat. When I did the Giants, I started with the same base geometry before I started warping and changing the proportions before I posed them. The eyes on the Giants are not properly spherical. But you want to kind of exaggerate some details. If I was going to make something photoreal, then yes, the eyes would be spherical. Instead, what I do is I have them pop out a little bit more to give more of a separation between the eye and the eye socket. Exaggeration is the order of the day when making figures. On first glance, this guy looks like an ordinary human. But when we zoom in on him, we will see that, for one, his hands are huge, as are his feet, although not as big as his hands. He is wearing a Nordic spectacle helm, and has a beard that, by the way, does not have any braids. I just wanted to double check it. And he has long hair. But the point is, his proportions are not those of a normal human. They are exaggerated. It's hard to see on the sculpt, but the hands have knuckles. And they have... you can kind of see it on the back of this one. The male, those rings are too large for real-world male. But you have to exaggerate it. The spectacle helm, the nasal, which is connected to a forehead piece, sticks out much farther than it would. And the hair, it's mostly locks and that. Okay, that depends on what you mean by non-heroic. If you mean at this scale, I would never. Simply because it wouldn't be very durable at all. It would break in a stiff breeze, and if it was printed in cast in metal, it would bend if you touched it like this. It would bend before it fell over. And for something as intricate as something like this, you know, you can see her. She's all nice and detailed. She would not be able to support her weight if I used a more realistic scale for her limbs. If you mean for something that's a larger size to print, well, I guess you could say I did. Let me poke my head in here. This is an old print that I did, and I later went on to give him a zenithal priming, but I'll never paint him. This cannot be shared because it's done on a base geometry I didn't create. This was a storm giant. As you can see, he's huge. His sword is almost 3 feet wide. And yeah. The hands and head aren't that large. The feet are a bit large. I'll freely admit that. The feet are a bit large. But this is the closest thing I've done to non-heroic proportions. If I did a full-on Greek Titan, this is about the proportions I would use. Again, he is a giant. He needs the big feet. If I was going to do a 6-inch sculpt of a given character, I would use that character's proportions. More human-like proportions. Okay. Also, now that I think about it, I guess you could say my hunting drake doesn't have heroic proportions because he has roughly the same proportions as a as a big cat. You know, like a cheetah for the torso and the abdomen. And then I just thickened the neck and made it reptilian, and thickened the tail and made it reptilian. So I guess you could say this isn't heroic proportions either. Although it's pretty darn big, and I don't know about you. I don't want to be the human being hunted by the hunting drake. Put this back up. Yeah. This. Cyclopedia Anatomicae has so much useful artistic anatomy. This is, let's see, that is a horse leg. The shoulder and elbow of a horse. These are, I believe this is a wolf. Yeah, this is the dog paws. Cat musculature and skeleton. One of the best purchases I ever made at a local bookstore. Right here. I got so much out of it, and it's so useful to keep track of things like bony landmarks and the bony landmarks of the body. Areas where the muscles are more prominent, areas where body fat is more prominent. It is remarkably useful. Anatomy is something to really, really study when you are working on these sculpts. Simply because if you get the proportions more mutated, but you still have the anatomy working. Like this one isn't currently sprayed, but like the musculature on the dragon monk, it still follows the same rules as human musculature, even if its proportions are a bit off. It looks more real when you change the proportions than it would if you just slapped something down. Okay, how much was the book? I remember it was half off. And according to the ISDN, let's check this out. Where was it? Don't remember how much I paid. The default was made in 96. I bought it in like 2010. I don't remember how much I paid. And the original cover is gone. The original. But yeah, it was not triple digits. It was closer to 25, I think. $25. The same things that you study for doing drawing and 2D art are what you study for 3D art. Anatomy, proportion, dynamism. Let's break out old... this guy. What I did with him was I made his pose. If you can find it has to be the Cyclopedia Anatomicae. If you can find it for $10, snag it. The pose. The original version of his pose. The arm wasn't as pulled forward. The legs weren't as twisted back. And so I made the pose. Okay, that's the pose. Now, I grabbed the hand and dragged, and it twisted the torso, and it really looks like he's lunging forward compared to the previous version. It makes him look like he's in motion, especially since he might be in balance. Overall, he's in balance. If I printed him without the base and set him down, and without the club, he would be standing still. But by adding the club that pulls him forward a little bit more, his pose pulls him forward, it looks like he might be standing, but he's in the middle of an action. But what's more is it carries his personality. I saw a debate recently on Facebook where it was dynamic pose or static pose. Okay, straps. The big thing is, what are you sculpting in? Because that will change everything I'm about to say. Okay, with ZBrush, it's very simple. Hold down Control, you're using your masking brush, slide it to where it's, solid brush. Draw on where your strap will be, extract it, you've got a strap. You can Dynamesh it to make it a more even shape. And then one thing I've started doing is I made a couple buckles that I use ZBrush to make as an insert mesh brush. And I can just draw on the buckle and then just tweak it until it fits on the strap. In fact, I did that on the Ronin. No, not the Ronin. Who did I do it on? I did that on some figure recently. Anyway, Yeah, so it makes it much easier. Um, Sculptress, I don't know how to work with Sculptress, but I do know that it dynamically subdivides where you're sculpting. So they might have something equivalent to a layer brush, where as you're sculpting, it pulls it out a full layer, but it stays evenly outward. You can use that to draw on your straps. That's a possibility. One thing you've got to watch out for with Blender is you've got to make sure that after you've finished doing all your sculpting, that you can Boolean everything into a single manifold surface. ZBrush does that automatically with Dynamesh, and it does it by completely rewriting the entire topology, but at such a high polygon count that you can't really tell. And then you can decimate it down. About 60,000 triangles is about the minimum you really want to use for a human figure before it starts turning the face into Bizarro with hard, sharp lines. Do you mind not doing that on camera, Shinju? So you got to make sure that the strap that you make with an array and curve actually slightly sinks into the skin. I'm joking around about the cat. She's about to turn 13. I've had her since she was about 6 weeks old. There's a reason her bed is literally right next to my chair, and I'm not that reason. She is. Yes, Dapper, that's great for doing things like what we're doing. For my previous job, or for my current main job, it doesn't work. Because one thing that my job does is we create what are called morphs, or blend shapes. It's, for example, the blend shapes that I make on my own geometry. I mean, have I shown y'all the full barrage of what I've got on my base male figure as it stands right now? I mean, I got quite a few. I mean, it's just... Let me go ahead and pop on over to here. And here we have my base male. And with this, I've got human. I've got a very low poly, or low detailed, deep one, or Kuatoa, if you want to use it as that. You know, your Dragonborn. Dry Undead. Dwarf. Elf. Yes, I am of the version that says elves are taller and thinner than humans. Elves are the humans, but humans are the dwarves. I don't like D&D elves because they're so tiny. Gnome. One thing about a gnome is they have pointed ears and a really big nose. Goblin. Yes, heavily inspired by the old Warhammer goblins. Halfling. Really big eyes. And here's another example of I had to cheat. Those eyes would not fit inside the head if they were spherical. Hobgoblin, which compared to a regular goblin. You'll also notice that when I do a goblin, only the goblin changes. But when I do a hobgoblin, you'll see that it's part goblin, part orc, a little bit of troll, and a little bit of muscular. These other dials are slaves to the one dial. Now there's kobold. This is how I picture kobolds, although they also have tails. This figure does not have a tail, so I have a separate piece that becomes the tail. Ogre. This is an ogre. Orc. And then Orc Boss, which is more of the Warhammer concept of as they get older. This would also be an Orog or some other, thing like that. The tusks for the Orc and the Orc Boss are actually, again, separate props. Type 1 Reptilian, which is more of a skinny, more human-like, more Argonian-styled Reptilian. Type 2, which is a lot less human-like, but is still kind of human-sized. And then the Type 3, which is a lot more brutish. And again, I've got a tail separate. And then I have a Turtle, which his shell is separate. Do I have... where did I put it? I think, yeah, I don't have the turtle shell in my props directory, but yeah, that's what he looks like outside of his shell. And troll. Now you notice a significant difference between this type of troll and what I ended up doing with Grendel. The head proportions are different for that troll. It's a lot more cartoony, and it's a lot more based on the good old-fashioned Games Workshop trolls. Okay. Then I also have modifiers. This is to modify it to be a proportional scale for 8mm. You'll see that the head, hands, and feet are even bigger. The chest is a lot thicker. Because at 8mm scale, like Warhammer, Warhammer Epic, it's not so good. Oh, excuse me. And then I've got one that just makes him more muscular. I have one that is only for use in the epic scale, and that's adding on soldier gear. I have... this is strictly for use in combination with things like the orc. So that you have a female and male orc. Or whatever other race for the more monstrous races. And then I have one that just simply erases the ears. That's just some of what I've done with my base figure. Now the thing is, let's go take a look at that orc, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to make the bones visible. These bones are how the figure gets posed. The small point, or the short point, is the point at which it ends is the pivot point. In this case, for the collar there. This is where it meets the next bone. And each one of these planes, like the green, the red, and the blue, is a different plane of motion. So, for example, for the green, he brings it very... it basically moves perpendicular to the plane for the blue and the green. Or not for the blue and green, but for whichever is the side to side and twist, side to side and bend, and then it twists along whatever the ring is here. For example, here it would be the green, which would be the twist. Alright. Now, this is the bones for the human shape. If this was just a shaping morph, when I pulled this dial, the bones would stay where they are. Instead, it actually moves the joints to follow where they are in the anatomy of the orc. So I can then grab the jaw. And I can then, I do this, drops again. You can see it even better on the ogre. You can see the skeleton grow and the body parts follow. And that's why I use Daz Studio, because I can do that. I can also, let's load the hand out like that and twist it and then bend the forearm. Okay, now I go to props. Actually, let me go ahead and bring this hand side to side and twist it just a little bit. Twisting it just a little bit. Go to props and let's put in a right-handed flail. You'll notice the hand actually changed its pose so that the hand is grasping the handle of the flail. That is one reason why I did that. Now, if I go to sci-fi and I pull in, say, the heavy rifle, I forgot to select my figure. 200 base male, heavy rifle. The hand moves again. In this case, the fingers aren't like this; they're like that. It's hard to see, but you can see it better underneath down there. So, yeah. Anyway. I did all of the weight painting myself in this program. I only use IK if I'm going to do something like, I've got him in the pose I want, but I need to tweak the position of the hips, so I plant the feet and tweak the hips, and then move the upper torso to fit. Blend shapes are morphs. Basically, with a blend shape, let me go ahead, I'm going to take this, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, it's currently got a level of subdivision on, so I'm going to, and wire texture set, you can see the wireframe, the geometry of the figure. It's not very good geometry, it's sloppy, it's very, very sloppy, and I'm not proud of it. Like that pole right there at the elbow, the weird slop here at the eyes and at the chest. Anyway, if I then turn it into a Dragonborn, you can see that I'm just moving the polygons. I'm not changing what polygons are there. And so, when I do the dry undead, the same thing happens. It just moves the vertexes. It doesn't add any new geometry or take away any geometry. I used ZBrush for that. And that's why I don't use Sculptress, because most of my day job involves doing this sort of thing, creating these morphs. And if you try to do that in Sculptress, a lot of times it'll change your point order, which means instead of turning into an elf, it turns into a random set of points in the vague shape of an elf. Oh, There. This is what I've been meaning to show you. I do not believe DAS can import STL. But you see what I'm saying? When I'm doing this, you can see that the geometry isn't actually, the topology isn't changing. Just the position of the individual vertices. Like the nose pops out with the outer nostril becoming the actual inner nostril. The eyes stay eyes, but the ears fade in and become a depression on the side of the head. That sort of thing. Oh. Now, the female figure that I made is not the same base geometry as the male. So I can't have them share blend shapes. It is a totally different geometry, sculpted at an actual different part in my time as a modeler. You see, that base geometry that I've made was actually made during a time when I was making mods for a video game called Freedom Force. Freedom Force was a hybrid role-playing game, real-time strategy for superheroes. And what you did is you had your team of heroes, which there's very few. There's not much room in the main campaign for original characters. Original characters are for player versus player, or the more fun aspects of just throwing somebody and see who wins. But you've got your character. You're in an open city. You click on the character of the four in your team. You click on a spot to move there. And then you can click on their powers to use their powers. Anyway, it was a very, very cartoony looking game. If you look up Freedom Force 2001, I think it was, you can see what I mean. It was very much based on Jack Kirby's work. Very, very low polygon. The default figures were 1,000 triangles. And if you know anything about modern MMOs and that's small even for a modern MMO. Well, I was making my own personal figure for use in that. That was going to be a bit more heroic than the default, which was kind of it was all in the textures. And it only had a painted on diffuse texture and a shininess texture, which wasn't even really a specular, it was using a reflection map to make it look like metal. Yep. I even got to the point where I made a as my brain shuts down, I made a animation of I made a whole bunch of meshes of transformers, and I animated them all from scratch, and then got to the point where I was actually having them transform. When you sprinted, they would transform, and vehicle mode, and then when you stopped, they transform. Or if it was something like Starscream, when he flew, he would transform into jet mode, and then he'd go back to robot mode to shoot. So yeah, and then I actually did a mod that very short one, only had like 4 missions, but it was a typical. It was set up like a typical 1980s cartoon episode. basic concept, you know.
There's Wheeljack, and he's working on something in his lab. And he makes it, and it looks cool, and he doesn't remember what it does.
And then the Decepticons attack, wanting to steal what he just made. And while everybody's outside distracted by the fact that, oh my god, there's Devastator forming. And yes, there's a full animation of the various Constructicons rising up, turning, twisting, and shifting, and turning into Devastator. And then while you're trying to fight Devastator, all you have to do is you have to last long enough for over the hill comes Omega Supreme. You then get a cutscene where Ravage sneaks in, knocks down Wheeljack, and takes whatever the widget was. You then come to comes to whatever your team that you chose has to sneak onto the island above. All right, cheers, Man of Steel. The island above the Decepticon ship. You got to disable these various points around the map so that you can get through a shield and go down into the tunnel. And then finally, there's a battle inside the Decepticon base to get the widget back. You get the widget back, and he's like,
"Oh yeah, now I remember what it does. It's a nuclear-powered coffee maker." What do you mean, you don't need a nuclear-powered coffee maker?
Anyway, it's only 20 after 9. Let's do an example of me looking up some reference images, okay? So what we're going to do is just pop over here. I got Google Image Search. Okay. Let's say that what I need to do is I need to come up with some kind of, not the main clothing, but like the ornamentation for a seagoing titan. Well, there's not really much on seagoing titans, so let's just look up sea elves. And we don't want Skyrim, because Skyrim sea elves are sailors, not underwater. Okay, we also want to make sure that we get size large. The larger the images, the more detailed they will be. This is a typical example of a Skyrim sea elf. They're kind of purpley, but they're above ground sailors. Okay, so we look for something that's got some interesting details on it. And I usually tend to scroll down a little bit and start there. Like, this is a bad thing. No. This is just concept sketches. The old sea elves from Warhammer Fantasy were sailors. I'm not seeing a lot of what I want. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to Triton. Greek. And once again, we're still at large over here. And I'm looking not so much for the actual Greek representations as the modern fantasy art versions. Just for ideas on, kind of decorations. Like this leather mask was interesting. I could save that, but it doesn't really look so much Triton to me as more nature-based. This is a rather cartoony-looking version. However, here is a really nice version, and I'm not going to click on it, but you can see he's got gills not only his neck, but he's also got gills on his shoulder, which is kind of questionable. But he's got some really nice looking fins and interesting ridge down the center of his forehead. His ears are fins and his hair looks almost like seaweed. Now, I'm not going to go any further into this simply because there's a very good chance I will stumble across something that will get this video pulled from YouTube. Not for copyright reasons, but for nudity reasons. Yeah. I do not have that mod around. It has been 17 years, 16 years since I dealt with that. I think I still have the animation of the transformation that I did for one of the figures. There was a figure that was put out in many years ago. But further into this, simply because there's a very good chance I will stumble across something that will get this video pulled from YouTube. Not for copyright reasons, but for nudity reasons. Yeah. I do not have that mod around. It has been 17 years, 16 years since I dealt with that. I think I still have the animation of the transformation that I did for one of the figures. There was a figure that was put out in many years ago. But yes, Carlton. Yes. What do you want? Oh. Anyway, there was a figure called Armorhide. He was a blue Mack truck. A little small schmuck. I need to put you down. Ugh. Anyway, I did a figure for him and full animation of him transforming. And the way I made him transform, I made him actually transform. Let's see. Sculpting. No. .avi. Is this the one? Anyway. Go ahead and close that. Thank you. It's almost 9:30. I really don't have much else to fill in. Most of the reason why I did what I did tonight was because I didn't have anything for sculpting on the show. I don't want to do too much more of what I'm doing for my Kickstarter. I want to keep a lot of it in reserve for when I actually go, oh, by the way, here's what's in the Kickstarter. You know, I mean, yeah, there's no way I'm not going to show off Grendel. There's no way I'm not going to show him off. Because he came out exactly as I imagined it. Oh, by the way, the green ring around the base is green metallic. The way I did that is something that, if you paint, you might be interested in. Vallejo makes an interesting little substance called metal medium. Metal medium is exactly what it says. It is paint medium with the very fine mica flakes and aluminum flakes that Vallejo use. And it says on the bottle, Metal Medium, a water-based acrylic formula. Can be used alone, giving a transparent silvery effect, although I must emphasize here it's not very transparent. It's rather opaque, actually. Or can be mixed with color at 50%, resulting in a paler metallic shade. Also used for highlights. Metal Medium. I mixed it with this Kelly Green. It's green skin from Army Painter. And yeah, it was like mixing it with white, and this came out a lot paler, and the end result was the green shade of green around the rim of the base. So, I really don't want to do a painting video, simply because it takes me forever. I'm one of those that I'll paint and I'll thin down the paint, and I will let each layer dry and become very thin layers. The base tan on Grendel's skin took me 5 layers of paint. As for the green, what I did, I have a thing of pillow foam. I tear off chunks of the foam. Just grab a bit and tear it off. Like that. Fold it a little bit. About like that. Then I dip it in the paint and dab it onto the skin. It gives it more of a speckled, more of an organic look rather than trying to blend it on. It also goes in areas like, an area that's very often wrinkled, like deep in between the folds of skin. It won't get in there as much, so it ends up giving more of a more organically weird shaped look to the green coming over the tan. I then did it again with a darker green on top of the hump and on the very backs here and the very back of the arm and the thighs. But it's like all tan, then a section of green, medium, kind of a medium greenish brown, and then a darker greenish brown, like that. I then used, good old-fashioned talent in a bottle, Agrax Earthshade. This is the only Citadel paint I have in my collection. The only one. I don't like these bottles. Look at how angled the cap is just to get it to close. I don't like that. I set it on top of my array of Vallejo and Army Painter paints. Anyway, and then I went from there, and then I refined the shading with some other washes and a little bit of highlighting. Like I said, on the pimples, I then went over with red, and then did some very pale glazes and built up to make them look like whiteheads with the little angry red skin around them. The loincloth area, it looked like different patches of different kinds of leather, and then gave it a wash so that would sink into where the seams were. Did a little bit of highlighting afterwards. That sort of thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is probably the closer... Actually, strong tone and soft tone kind of average out to Agrax Earthshade. But they behave differently. These darken the shade a lot more, as well as go into the grooves and the widgets. Agrax, it tends to stain a little bit, which on large flat surfaces, it ends up like the coffee stain effect on it. So you got to be careful with it. But it's also I had it. It costs more than the Army Painter, but it comes in a larger bottle. This is a 24 ml bottle instead of the 17 ml bottle down here, and I can just dip my brush directly in it. Whereas the dropper bottles for inks, you got to have, just drop out a drop or so, and try and keep up. Metals, I have black metal from the Model Air series by Vallejo. It's, despite being thinned down for airbrush, it's quite opaque. I'll then use various shades of metal and silver to build up to a highlight. And then that metal medium straight on the finest details. And similarly, I have a bottle of Game Color Tinny Tin. If you remember the previous version of Citadel paints, they had one called Tin Bits. Very, very dark like that. Then I've got copper, bronze, and 2 shades of gold. One of these shades is the gold from Vallejo Model Color. The other, greedy gold from Army Painter, that I really don't like. It's very, very sloppy. Other little widget paints I've got dry rust, which is a kind of a crackle effect or grainy effect, and the
Yeah. And it got away from me.
and the glistening blood, which is basically it's blood red with a medium that thickens, as well as it has a gloss sheen, so it looks like blood.
Go figure. It's called glistening blood. What do you think it would look like? Bile?
Now, Vallejo also produces something called crackle medium. Have you seen the crackle paints put out by Games Workshop? Like there's one that looks like dried mud, etc., etc. Well, with the crackle medium, if I wanted to have something that looked like cracking ice, I could mix a little bit of this really pale blue and a little bit of white, and the crackle medium. Paint it over, and it looks like cracking ice. If I wanted something that looked like, I don't know, alien purple mud, there you go. Just mix that with the crackle medium. And with the crackle medium, the thicker you paint it, the larger the chunks, if you know what I mean. Now, what looked horrifying about your sculpt, Dapper Gent? Oh, some parts were missing. That can happen. If you're going from ZBrush, for example, to another program, you've got to make sure you have to export every subtool. You have to make sure you don't have geometry hidden. You have to make sure you don't have geometry masked. That sort of thing. I don't know what program you're importing from, but a lot of programs will have be touchy about exporting and importing. Into the trash can you go? I need to hit the store tomorrow. Okay, I've never really worked with Blender since 1.2, 1.3. I hated the UI. The original Blender UI was horrible, simply because there was no such thing as the design committee. Okay, one thing that can cause them to look like parts are missing, if the normals are flipped. But yeah, back when I tried Blender was before the complete revamp. And oh my god, I mean, let's say I wanted to have I wanted to find the modifier that would took a polygon object and bend it. There were 5 different places I could go to find 5 different methods for bending a polygon object. Hello, Mark. You're late. You missed most of the show, which had absolutely no sculpting at all. No sculpting? But it did have Grendel. Yeah. Grendel. I saved a few days ago. Oh, and in case anyone's wondering, I have the resin versions of the Basakwan primed and waiting for painting. Grendel is pretty big, yeah. He's not as big as... I'm going to use the plastics to show you. But Grendel is not as big as Polyphemus. But he is big. They are giants. These are not kids. And if you see, Grendel's fist is actually bigger than Polyphemus's, and his feet are smaller. If he stood upright, he'd actually be a foot taller than Polyphemus. Oof. Carlton? What are you doing? Yes, I have affectionate cats. With dogs around. Oh, I have no idea what it's like to have what you're doing interrupted by a small furry animal. Do I? Carlton. Yeah. Hey. Carlton? What are you doing? Carlton? What are you doing? Thank you, Mark. I have quite a few more to sculpt and quite a few accessories. I don't plan on having quite as many figures as Danny did in his Lost Dragons, but then again, I'm also doing everything myself. Now, can someone tell me why people don't like black cats? What is wrong with black cats? Nothing. Yeah, nothing. Yeah. There was a discussion a while back about what made Lost Dragons so successful. And I basically said, okay, here's what it boils down to. Number one, everybody loves dragons. And almost every single role-playing game out there with a fantasy bent has dragons. And you can even play a dragon in some of them, like Rifts. Number two, they were some phenomenal dragon sculpts. Ignoring my Dragonborn, those sculpts are some of the best I've seen for dragons. Number three, dragons are generic. Yes, that might be the Father Frost dragon, but you could use it to represent the Silver Dragon in your campaign just by how you paint it. Number four, there was a boatload of stuff in that, a total boatload in the Kickstarter. And he's not even done. And number five, and Danny's one of the most popular members of the community in terms of just sheer likability. He's such a nice guy. People want to help him out. There was a Kickstarter a while back that had a lot of amazingly well sculpted figures, but you could only use them in the scenarios he presented, and they really didn't fit anything that was in any kind of game. And apparently he thought that all you needed was big, really well sculpted figures, and you'll get the same money he did. And he barely got more than $500. Didn't even get it funded. So I'm hoping that I'm not Danny. I'm hoping that my sculpts are good enough that even though they represent specific characters, they're versatile enough. I mean, you could use Grendel as a troll. You could use Polyphemus as a hill giant or a cyclops. That sort of thing. I'm hoping that you get enough in the set. The giants, their accessories, their allies and enemies. And they're not dragons. So I'm hoping for 3 of the 5 to get me at least some of the way there. Mark, when I adopted the ninjas, my Carlton and Ralph, who doesn't come up as often, I was adopting 2 black kittens. Now here's their story. Carlton was found in a parking lot on one side of town. Ralph was found underneath a house on the other side of town. And they were fostered with the same litter. They were the same age. And that whole litter got put into the window at PetSmart. Within a week, all of the cats were gone except for these 2 little black cats. A week later, 2 weeks after they were put in that window at age 8 weeks, they were still there. And at this point, my mother, who has been saying, no, we can't get a friend for Shinji because she's a diva, turns to me and goes, let's go get those 2 little black cats. Well, we went to the shelter to fill out the paperwork to adopt them. I thought the woman behind the counter was going to kiss us both because she was crying so hard that I was willing to adopt 2 black cats. So, yeah. And what I have is 2 of the most affectionate house panthers you could ever ask for. Yeah, we call them the ninjas because, number one, look at this. She's so white, you can see her in pitch black. She practically glows at night. Them, you will fall flat on your face because you will not see them, even in dim light. That and Ralph, he's got Bella on his collar. he's learned how to run full speed and not make that bell ring. We have to put 3 bells on his collar for them to actually ring when he runs. So yeah, they're ninjas. But yeah, you can go back and rewatch the video, Mark, because I also went over what an art director does and what concept art is for. When I concept, I'm not doing concept art. I'm just grabbing random reference images that have objects of interest to me. Oh, that looks cool. That looks interesting. That's a nice little widget. And I use it to inspire me. I don't copy what I get. I mean, like I said, if you look at the pictures that I showed earlier, again, you'll see them. They look nothing like either one of those figures, but both of those figures were inspired by the artwork that I was showing. Outstanding, Mark. You know, it's not been that very long ago that if you had a dog from the shelter, you were like, oh, you've got a shelter dog. Mine's a pureblood Alsatian, or et cetera, et cetera. Or mine's the grandson of my mother's prize-winning Pomeranian, whatever. And now it's a mark of pride that you have rescued your animals. All 3 of my cats are rescues. Technically, she's a rescue from an idiot, not a rescue from a shelter. But even so. And then the ninjas came from Bartland Animal Shelter and a animal shelter just north of here. Yeah, like I said, my reference folder in on my hard drive. How much did I say it was? My storage, the one I've got in my storage hard drive, is 4.6 gigabytes of reference images. The one on my desktop is much smaller. It's only 250 meg of images. And according to this, that's only 562 files and 19 subfolders. Yowzers. But also, right, that's awesome. Just remember, don't copy what you're seeing. Use it to inspire you and say, I like the look of how they did that. If I take that but do it like this, how will it look? And like I said earlier in the show, probably the best reference material I ever got. The Cyclopedia Anatomicae. Especially for critters. Now, as an example on art direction, one thing Danny does amazingly well is he's a great art director. And by that I mean, I sculpted the first of all of the Dragonborn I sculpted for him and said, this is what I've got. He said, okay, can you do this and maybe change this and change that? And these changes were, entirely acceptable. So I did changes. Okay, that's good. Another one that I did, okay, so he said, can you change this? I said, well, if I change that, I may have to resculpt from scratch because some of the whole bit of it is problematic. Sculpting critters, I started to do that early on with what ended up being a product I did for work. And it was a spawn of Shub-Niggurath. He is, and he's reasonable. I've dealt with art directors who were not reasonable. If you say, I can't do this because of this, he'll say, okay, well, what if we try this instead to try to push it over the top. And so he does. He's been busy recently, so some of the sculpts I've been working on for him were kind of delayed because I need his feedback on some of what I'm doing. But anyway, it's now 10 till 10. This entire video has been basically me rambling on about various subjects, up to and including making a mod for the old game Freedom Force, a superhero RTS, how art direction works, showing some of the sample inspirational reference images I have for Giants. There's a reason there's several hags in there. Really, Mark? I think you'll like this then. This is a mesh I made for Freedom Force. Attack animation, another attack animation, combat idle, and transform. He actually transforms. Let's watch that again. That's the idle animation. That's one of the attack animations. Another one. Combat idle. And... So. Yeah, I made an entire mod that was like 3 missions long, just short, set up just like an episode of the 80s cartoon. Wheeljack makes a widget, Decepticons attack and steal it, Autobots go on a raid, get the widget back, and you find out the widget was nothing more than a nuclear-powered coffee maker.
What do you mean you don't need a nuclear-powered coffee maker? And yes, I did a lot of the voices myself. And of course, some of the voices I couldn't do as well as others.
Mm-hmm. Anyway. So it's 5 till now. I'm going to go ahead and log on out of here. I got work to do. So, I'm going to stick up my hand. And this hand is going to go... And I'm going to do the full-on countdown. And so that's going to be a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1.
Autobots, roll out.